Hello there, we are your hosts Vivek and Pabitra from the Agile Coach Podcast. In this podcast, we bring fresh perspectives to you through our interviews with thought leaders in Agile coaching, facilitation, business analysis, and product management roles. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Today we have Michelle Paulk in our podcast. Really excited to have this conversation with you, Michelle. Just to talk about Michelle's background. She's a director of Agile coaching and Kaizen facilitation at Pfizer. Prior to that, she was at Nissan as an Agile coach, the car company, and she was at a healthcare company and also several other companies where she's played a role of a facilitator, project manager, product owner, product manager, and Agile Coach, Scrum Master. So she's got a wide variety of experience. But Michelle, I want you to kind of go and walk us through, your background. How did you get into tech? Kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vivek. I'm really happy to be here today. So kind of funny story of how I got into tech was actually first how I didn't get into tech. I studied English and Italian when I was in college, and Google came to do some recruiting when I was there, and they were recruiting for AdWords engineer, people who would review ads all day long and make sure that they met their production standards. And I went out to Mountain View and I saw the campus and I was like, wow, this is really cool, but I don't know if this is really for me. And I ended up not getting that job and then doing basically the same job at a really sad newspaper for a year after college. So it was really kicking myself that first year after I graduated. But I spent a year kind of doing my time at this newspaper. And then I ended up I was going to move to Virginia with my boyfriend at the time, who was going to school at UVA for PhD in chemistry. And when we were looking to move out there, I saw that there was this company called Rosetta Stone that was based in the Shenandoah Valley, and they did language learning software. And so the Italian major that I got, then my parents were like, what are you doing? You should get a second major in business or something more practical. That actually helped me get my job at Rosetta Stone. And coincidentally, the hiring manager there had been a newspaper guy. So even the year I spent doing my time at the newspaper helped me get that role. So I started there doing content development, and it was all about the language thing. And I happened to learn about tech because it was a tech company, and I found, the people were really cool, and I just fell in love with it. So I've been in that kind of space, tech space, I guess, ever since.
Yeah. That's cool. So you did work at Rosetta Stone. You did work on editing and all kind of things. But I want to know, when did you actually become a project? I think that was your first role, right, as a IT project manager. So walk us through what that was like.
Yeah. So I found as I really enjoyed the language piece of my work, being a content editor, and then I kind of hit some growth point where I noticed this pattern in my professional development where I start to ask questions and be really irritating to people in a different role. And that's a little bit of a signal to me, maybe I ought to go and do that since I have so many opinions about it. Yeah. So I started, I was just getting curious about project management and really, being a pain to the project managers that were on my projects. And my boss, who is a really benevolent soul, saw this in me and was like, hey, why don't you would you like to take some classes and would you like to learn more about this? And so I did. And they helped me, to do some classes at University of Virginia to learn more about project management. And then I applied for a role, within Rosetta Stone. So I was managing on the content side, several projects that we were for new product development. And so, as I was in that role for a little while, it got closer and closer to the tech side of the house. So you'd have to learn how to kind of hook up all of the content development with the software development that was happening at the same time. And they were an agile shop from like early on. So, people would talk about sprints and Scrum Masters, and, it's kind of piqued my curiosity about it.
Yeah, no, that's such a cool story. I'm just curious, like what attracted you about Agile and Scrum, like when you were a project manager, even though you're in an Agile shop, right? Like, what was that transition like? Like, were you excited to become a Scrum Master or like become, work in an Agile environment?
Yeah, so I think like I was drawn to it more out of necessity. Like this was the thing I needed. So I was working on this project. It was a brand new product. Like we'd never done it before. So we're all in this complex space. It's like, who knows what it's supposed to be? We're building all the content as we're building the tools to build the content, as we're building the software. And it's like, how's all this going to line up? And I was driving myself totally crazy, like trying to keep track of like 40 different content developers working in different disciplines, lining their schedules up with the software development teams, which were all running like, they maybe had a roadmap for 2 or 3 months, but that was it. And so I was trying to do everything for everybody. And then I got pregnant with my first child. And I was like, oh, I am really like, I was doing all this by just sheer overwork and like putting in the time. And I realized like, okay, like I am not going to be able to do this like once my kid is here. Like, first of all, I have to take maternity leave where I just won't be here at all. And then when I come back, like I'm going to need to pick her up from daycare and like take care of her. Like I can't, be spending all this time running around chasing all these grown adults. And so like I started to think through like, well, so I hold all this in my head about like dependencies and how, if we're going to slip the schedule and what happens, how do I make it so they know what happens and they can do it? And then, and then once I started to back off, people really stepped up and I'm like, that's a thing. And then kind of looking at like, oh, is there a way that we could lean out like what we're doing where it wouldn't have to take so long, where we could make it a little bit easier for ourselves? So all these little ideas started to get planted just out of necessity, and realizing like my pace was not sustainable in any way.
Yeah, no, that's such a cool story. Thank you so much for sharing that. So in your LinkedIn, your headline, right? You said you've owned a few things about you being a project manager and the challenges that you've had in becoming an Agile coach or a Scrum Master. Yeah. And it's been a pretty transformative journey for you, looks like. So walk us through like what that has been like for you.
Yeah. So I think like, I've heard other people say this is not my own insight, but that, we are drawn to the things that we need to learn, or we teach the things we need to learn. And I think that is absolutely true for me and Agile. It's like by nature, I am like an extremely ordered, want to plan ahead, like years in advance, total control freak. And so like, learning kind of, experiencing that frustration of how the world doesn't really work that way. Like the world doesn't really care if you had a plan or if you expect, if you did a lot of work, like, sketching everything out. Something is going to happen that you can't anticipate. It's not your fault. It's not a failure of planning or insight. It's just, this is the nature of things. And so, I guess I think about my first project when I was a project manager. I was working on some language content that was for the military. And so we were doing the two languages I was responsible for were Dari and Pashto. And our translators were in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And things happened on that project that like no one could have anticipated. Like, oh, the internet cafe where this guy does his translation just got bombed. And so now, we're off by like a couple of weeks. And by the way, is he okay? And then, there was a volcano eruption in Iceland that disrupted air travel for like 3 months. And why did that matter? Well, we were doing our recording in Istanbul. And so we had to like figure out how to reroute people like around the Southern Hemisphere. So, stuff that like a project manager says, this ought to be on your risk register. Like it's so ridiculous to even think about, and realizing like, oh, a more agile mindset would be, stuff's going to happen. It's more important. How do we figure out how to respond to it? And like, what do we do now? Not, how we abandon the plan. So
Yeah. And just to give everybody a context, so this is a little bit interesting situation that you're in. So you're working with people in Afghanistan and Turkey because you're in a team developing language translation services, right? So your users or your stakeholders were there, and you just somehow they were a big core part of the project.
Yeah.
And I guess things happened. The cafe blew up.
Yeah.
There was a volcano in Iceland, right. You said? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how do you factor that into your project plan?
And the thing, I guess the mindset shift for me was realizing, like, as a project manager, I genuinely felt bad that I didn't anticipate that these things would happen. Like, if I had really done a good job of coming up with my risk register and planning this project, I would have accounted for the possibility.
Yeah.
Like, that's a level of control freak that I am. Like, where I'm like, I should have seen this coming. Like,
I should have seen that volcano.
Yeah. Like, I really should have had a broader view of what we're doing here. And, it's like, surely there are industries where people have to think like that, like, and to the nth degree where it's, human health and safety, or, I suppose if you run like a nuclear plant, like you have to think through like all that kind of stuff. But like, that's not what we do.
Yeah. And even like, even regulation, right? Like regulations, like every company right now is being regulated, and it's just really hard to innovate something and also look at, regulatory compliance stuff. Yeah. And, it just comes out of nowhere. It's really hard to get all of that. So no, you bring a great point. And Michelle, I also appreciate you said whatever you need to learn, you get attracted to.
Yeah.
Like, tell me more about that. Like, I feel like when you said that, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like, I see why I was attracted to this work too, because I really needed to work on those areas as well. But tell me more about that.
Yeah. Well, so for me, I find like, it's like the stuff that I'm really passionate about in my work. It's like, I find like I'm relearning the same lessons over and over again, and like in a deeper and deeper way, so here's like the anticipating problems versus like the other mindset, which is just like having this kind of more fluid, flexible, agile, dare I say, like, some kind of buoyancy around. You can't anticipate all the things. So what's important is your ability to pivot or to move or to flex without tensing up. And, I guess like, I see like kind of throughout my career and also just personal life, how these lessons keep coming back to me in a different way. And like, just to share like a personal aspect, last year we had a house fire, and I was sitting at my desk as I am now, and all of a sudden my smoke detector started going off, and my furnace had caught fire in the attic. And so like, okay, obviously that was not on my plan. That was not on the risk register. My old project manager self would have been like, I really should have anticipated, what this would mean. But, it felt like it was a test of how deeply do I believe some of these things about agility, because, the next 3 months was finding like temporary housing, working through repairs, and really dealing with kind of day-to-day chaos as we were navigating like that situation with my family, and thinking like, okay, I don't have to plan weeks in advance. I just have to figure out, what am I doing today? Like, how is this going to work today? What am I doing right now? But it really stressed and pushed me, to think about like, all right, this is buoyancy, not like having it all planned out. It's just, we find all these new places to relearn the same things.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, Michelle. I can definitely relate to that story. And as you're saying this, things are coming to me. Well, maybe this will be a part 2 of the podcast where we discuss. But I'm really curious, like from, going from a project manager and you became a Scrum Master, Agile Coach. So what were like, as you were a new Scrum Master, like what were the things that you had to like, you struggled maybe, or were you able to do things really properly? Like, what was your role like when you were your first Scrum Master?
Yeah. So I think like some of the things that I had learned as a project manager, like I used, so, project managers get quite good at leading without authority because you rarely have like positional authority, depending, of course, on the organization. But, often people report to somebody else. They're, maybe taking some direction from you in terms of the sequencing of their work, but, they've got another boss. So you have to learn these ways of influencing people. And so that I think was powerful, but I also like there's a dark side to some of that, which is like, I know ways that I can make it uncomfortable for somebody to not do what I want them to do. Like I can't make them do it, but I can make it very uncomfortable for them not to do it. And in the beginning, like I would make ample use of that stuff. And so like over time, I think maybe it's that I'm getting older or like it just kind of relaxing a little bit. But it's like this, I'd rather not turn to my more brutal methods. Like I'd rather, make sure that like when I'm working with a team, I'm investing in them and like really believing that they want things to work well. I think sometimes as a project manager, you get a little bound up in like, I'm on the hook for delivering it. So like ends justify means. And if I've embarrassed you in a meeting or done what, like, it's for the good of the project. And even doing that, like it never really set right with me. And so I've kind of swung the pendulum the other way over time.
Yeah.
But there are many people I think who I've left in my wake. You can maybe interview them. It's like, so let's talk about your experience with Michelle as Scrum Master year one. Like, how did that really go for you?
Yes. But then Michelle, so thanks for sharing that. But then you learned it. You did self-reflection. You probably took some help. You deepened your learning. And then you took the journey of being an Agile coach and coaching other Scrum Masters. So what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so I think like some of the things that I like have helped me to learn is noticing patterns and where I tend to get stuck. So, one of the the patterns that I've kind of in the last couple of years really been inspecting and trying to find different ways of behaving and thinking is, hitting a wall with leaders. So, with a team, like, okay, I described some of like, brutal methods of embarrassing people or what, the project when I let the project manager out of the cage, like, doing that with a team, realizing like, this is unnecessary and it's, bad consequences. And like kind of, so, figuring that out. But then feeling like I had to, once I leaped through that, hurdle, thinking about the team's manager or their leader as another obstacle. It's like, well, this is a person I have to go and battle. It's like, why am I going to war with everyone? Like, kind of having the realization, after getting in some altercations with different leaders, like they are people with interest. They want the team to succeed. Like they're not opposed to like the idea of having to protect the team from someone who probably wants them to be successful, like kind of realizing that was a bit of an untested thought. Like, what am I not really understanding about this person's point of view? And so that kind of, that unlocked an interest for me in exploring professional coaching and like really being able to connect with people better one-on-one. I'm like, it's like you learn, oh man, why didn't I know this? Like 15 years ago, it would have been so much better.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So, as a Scrum Master, and as an Agile coach, I Michelle, as you're mentoring a new Scrum Master or a new Agile coach, what are some things that you like to see them do? Like if you can share, and I'm pretty sure you mentor a lot of Scrum Master in your team, right? What's important?
Yeah, so I think there's like there's definitely things around the technical practices that, we all kind of start, I think, our journey with is learning, how to do the job and how to show up and facilitate the meetings and that kind of thing. I'm drawn to like some of the inner work, I guess is a phrase maybe I'll use. When you're coaching a team, we can only coach as far as we've gone ourselves. So, if we're coaching a team to manage their work in progress, limit their work in progress and really focus on something, are we doing that ourselves? If we feel important, so I'm raising my hand because I have totally suffered from this syndrome. If we feel important because we're so busy and we have to, we've got all these things going on and I'm, too busy to think or too busy to eat. Okay, well, what are we teaching the team about what sustainable pace or focus or making time for connection with others? So, kind of first inspecting our own behavior to see, does that line up with the things that we're asking other people to do? And if it doesn't, then what is the, what's the blocker there? There's usually a reason why we are talking one thing and doing another thing. And so for each person, kind of the underlying belief is going to be different, but spending a little time sitting with that, I think is, one of the things that I try to make space for the people I'm mentoring or coaching to think about that, reflect on that, conversation, but also encouraging them to do some of that reflection work themselves.
That's amazing, Michelle. The last question that I will have for this part of the podcast, Michelle, is what else is hidden, or what are we missing as new Scrum Master, new Agile coaches? What else are we missing?
So the first thing that popped in my head when you asked that question, which is a beautiful question, by the way, is it's all fine. Everything's going to be okay. like they missed their sprint. It's going to be okay. They didn't do something right. It's going to be okay. I would just say, the learning process is very messy. Learning happens in the mess. And if you can be comfortable with that, you can know everything there is to know about Agile. This isn't really about you. This is about the team. So, how are we helping them learn and making space for them to make some mistakes and experience that for themselves? We have to kind of be okay with the mess. It will all be fine. I promise. I have a 0% fatality rate with all the people that I've coached and trained. So, I'm sure that everyone else is I don't believe this industry has killed anybody. So
yes,
it'll be okay.
Yeah, that is a brilliant point. So many times I've been in teams or situation where oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. I am taking so much on me, or this is irreversible. Yes, this actually happens a lot, right? But you're right. Everything is going to be okay. If I'm a Scrum Master, if I just leave the team, the team will do fine. They will self-correct. They will learn. And I love the point that learning is messy. And a lot of the times we try to make things perfect, which is something we're not, that's not what we're modeling, right? We are, as Scrum Master change agents, we're trying to model being present, looking at the needs of the team, looking at the needs of the customer, and really being intentional about what we produce for our customer. And that process is, there's a lot happening, and there's no one way to do it. Sometimes we've done things certain way with the team in a certain domain, and we try to take that and try to make that happen. But the world is very different. Companies, teams are very different. Companies are very different. But I love things will be okay. Things will be fine.
Yeah. It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. So you can do a perfect job, or you could do the same thing with a different group of people. It'll resonate with one and not with another. That you just haven't figured out yet what will click for them. And that's the same thing as a team is working with, on their product. They may have an iteration to begin with. It's a flop. They haven't figured out yet what it is. So that's, giving some space for all of that, I think is really a gift we can give ourselves and the people that we coach.
Yeah. Michelle, thank you so much for this conversation. I have had a blast. I learned. I had a few ahas. You're an awesome Agile coach. We already have part 2 lined up for this, Michelle. So I cannot wait for our next conversation where we talk about psychological safety. We do a deep dive on dealing in resistance, and we're going to talk about the SCAR framework. So really excited for our next episode. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. This has been an absolute joy.
All right, that's a wrap with this episode. Thank you for listening till the end. We hope these podcasts are providing value on your Agile journey. If you haven't visited our website, theagilecoach.com, we highly suggest you for other courses and supporting material on your journey. You can also get access to our self-paced courses or learn more about the live training that we provide to become a Scrum Master, Product Owner, Product Manager. With that, we will see you on the next episode. Love and best wishes from the Agile Coach.